Your attitude towards buying things determines whether you will be rich or poor. The main problem for many people is that they buy things incorrectly. This is some kind of big global bug that sits in everyone's mind. Let's talk about it today. Let's imagine a typical life situation: buying a phone, a car, a house, or some items. How can Eskmashi buying things determine whether there is a bug in your head or not? Are you thinking correctly or not? And how effective is your thinking? In my many years of experience, I have seen a lot of people, both rich and poor, and what really stands out is not that some have more money and some have less money. And what stands out is the pattern between a person's thinking and their current state. Rich people are not rich because they have a lot of money. They are usually rich because they have a different way of thinking. And the poor in turn remain poor, again because of their limiting beliefs. And today we will talk about this. The fact is, I myself came from a remote village located in the center of Kazakhstan. I worked there as a shepherd for a year and a half. Then I went to the army, then entered university and started doing business. That is, I practically went through all the stages, not of poverty, but not of great wealth either. I clearly understand what it means to save money. I clearly understand what it means when there is not enough money. I saw this in the example of my parents, I saw it in my own examples, and so on. And I didn't really understand it back then, but now analyzing the past and analyzing the experience I have, I see how poorly the poor think about purchases. Their ineffective thinking leads to ineffective purchases. That is, the purchases themselves are a consequence of their ineffective thinking. And by the way, when I talk about the rich and the poor, it's actually a conditional division, because I have seen some rich people with poor thinking, but I have seen some poor people with effective rich thinking. And if you observe over time, I'm sure that those people, even those who are poor today but who have effective thinking in their heads, sooner or later they will become rich. And those wealthy people who have poor, ineffective thinking, it's only a matter of time before they lose their money and wealth, because there are many wealthy people who obtained their wealth undeservedly. It was an inheritance. Either they did it through bribes or they used some proximity to power and so on. Therefore, when we talk today about the difference in attitudes towards purchases between the rich and the poor, I am not talking about the current state they are in. It's about the way of thinking. Let's analyze what constitutes the thinking of a poor person, which manifests in incorrect or ineffective purchases. The first, of course, is the very lowest level. When poor people are very poor, they really have to save on everything. They have to save on everything and they buy everything cheap. And unfortunately, they don't even have the opportunity to think about buying any expensive things. Well, in general, they can't even lift their heads from their poverty destitution. No matter how poor and destitute a person is, I still believe that they have resources. There is no person without resources. We are just all used to thinking that resources are only money. But look, the poor, a poor person, yes, there is no money or very little, but he has a lot of time, he has energy. If he is a young person, then he still has youth. Therefore, the surplus resources they have should primarily be directed towards acquiring knowledge and self-development. That is, start by investing in yourself, not with money, but with time and your energy. If we consider this category of people, their main mistake, I believe, is that they are always chasing cheap things. That is, in their minds, there is this limitation to only buy cheap things. What is the catch or inefficiency of such thinking? The thing is, when you buy cheaper things, you are practically killing your self-esteem. You are constantly lowering it. And plus, cheap things do not last long. They do not last long, and you have to buy them more and more often. Therefore, if you sum up the function that a cheap item performs and the function that an expensive item performs and divide this by the price, it often turns out that an expensive or quality item is much cheaper than a cheap one.
Many American millionaires and billionaires give such advice, life stories, that the basis of their financial planning Their successes is that they always bought items on sale, things from second-hand stores. So this is a popular opinion, a popular suggestion, how to deal with this.
If we talk about the situation where American billionaires or wealthy people buy cheap items or second-hand goods and so on, it's important to understand that their government regulation is much stricter, and for them cheap does not mean low quality. This is a different understanding. In our case, very often when you buy cheap things, not only are they cheap, they are of poor quality. If they were of good quality and cheap, it's always a matter of price and quality ratio. Then yes, you could buy things on sale and so on. Therefore, I believe that the main not the main, but one of the reasons for the inefficiency of thinking among poor people is that they buy cheap things, and as a rule, not just cheap things, but low quality things, because a low price overshadows a parameter like quality. They turn a blind eye to quality and buy cheap things. And I always pay attention to the fact that you need to buy the thing that performs its function well. For example, if you are buying a raincoat rather than buying a cheap and poor quality raincoat, it's better to buy, of course, a cheap and quality one, but but that often doesn't happen. So then it's better to buy a more expensive but quality one. That is, quality is more important. You must understand that ultimately you are not buying a raincoat, you are buying years of protection from rain. The function of a raincoat is to protect you from rain, and you are buying years of protection from rain. But when you buy a cheap raincoat, you are buying a cheap raincoat. Here is the mistake of poor people. They buy an item, not the function that the item performs. Therefore, first learn to see the function that these items perform, and relate the price to the duration of the item's function. And then you will have a more accurate understanding of the price of this item. The second inefficiency in the thinking of the poor, which manifests in purchases, is that many poor people buy things to show off. They buy not for themselves. They kind of show it just to show it. To compare with someone in this world, you can never truly impress anyone. There is always someone cooler, richer, and so on. Therefore, you should base your actions on your own goals, not on the goals of others. Do not try to compete with someone. Therefore, when you buy something, you should buy the function that this thing performs for you. What function does it perform for you? And not focus on what function it performs for others. For example, when a student or an employee living paycheck to paycheck buys an iPhone. But the question is, why does he need an iPhone? There are plenty of cheap smartphones on Android. Again, the question is not even about buying an Android. The question is to clearly understand what do you need it for. If you need it just to surf social networks, then it would be much more efficient to have a button phone. It would be much more efficient to have a button phone for one simple reason. You cannot surf or browse social networks on it, and thanks to this you save a huge amount of time and energy. Or let's take a situation where a person buys an expensive car. Well, from my own experience, I can say that even as a billionaire, I didn't buy a car more expensive than, the most expensive car I had at one time was a Bentley. $250,000. Although there are cars for $1,700,000, $500,000 and so on. I never had a Rolls Royce. I never had a Bugatti, Maserati, and so on and so on. Why? Because I see a specific function behind all my purchases that it performs. And it is very painful to watch when people buy things they cannot afford, because this leads to the third problem in the thinking of poor people, which is that they do not consider the cost of ownership. The cost of ownership is a big issue. The problem with poor thinking often lies in the fact that people do not know and do not see the cost of ownership. When I buy things, I always ask 5 questions. The first question, do I really need this or not? Second, how long will I use it? Third, how often will I use it? Fourth, can this be rented? Fifth, what is the cost of ownership? And of course, then there's also a sixth additional question. What will the price be if I sell it after use? And the cost of ownership includes taxes. If you bought a car, you pay taxes annually. If you bought a car, you change tires annually, you change filters and then oils and so on. This is all the cost of ownership. Here, I would particularly like to note that you might have gotten the impression that I am saying expensive things are always better. The fact is, an expensive thing is not always the best, but a cheap thing is not always the worst either. To understand, as I said, you should always evaluate anything based on its function for what you need it. And very often it happens that you buy an expensive item, it is of high quality, but the cost of ownership is very high. For example, when you buy an expensive car like a Mercedes or a Rolls-Royce, you spend once, but then the taxes are higher, the filters are more expensive, the tires cost more. Insurance is more expensive, everything is more expensive. The cost of ownership, and thus if you sum up the true cost of an item, which consists of two things, the initial price, the initial amount paid, and the cost of ownership, it may turn out that you bought a feature very expensively. The function that this car performs, for example, or this thing, very expensive, therefore you must definitely pay attention to this as well. Write in the comments 2 cases when you bought a cheap and low quality item. Just pre-reflect, write your mistakes, maybe, and so on. And second, the opposite situation when you bought an expensive item and it also turned out to be ineffective because it did not perform the function as effectively as another item could have. For example, even when I was on Buggy Tours, I gave an example when I said, look, we are eating from disposable Chinese plastic plates and with disposable forks and spoons. And the most interesting thing is, that this tableware is the most efficient at the moment. Although we could buy glass, porcelain plates, forks, spoons, and so on, silver ones, but the Chinese ones are currently the most efficient. Why? Because in steppe conditions, washing is difficult. It's much easier to crumple it up and throw it in a trash can or trash bag, and then dispose of it in the nearest village or settlement, than to wash it in the steppe conditions where there is no water. Plus, these dishes will break, they will get scratched, and their appearance will deteriorate, and so on and so on. So it depends on the function, on the goals. The value of any item is determined by the function or goals it fulfills. Be sure to complete this task. Describe 2 instances when you bought a cheap, low-quality item and when you bought an expensive, high-quality item, and it also did not satisfy you. And I think this reflection will be very useful for you to clearly understand how to approach buying things correctly. If we take, for example, how people with a wealthy mindset make purchases. I wouldn't even say rich people, but people with a wealthy mindset or an efficient mindset. They generally view any item, as I mentioned, primarily as a purchase of a function. And they determine the function relative to their goal. That is, they have a certain goal. To achieve the goal, they need an item to perform a certain function. Accordingly, he buys the thing that optimally performs its function to achieve his goals. That's the first point. The second point, wealthy people and people with a wealthy mindset always buy things and treat it as an investment. They always think, what will this give me in the future? No, their planning horizon is further, and they think, what will this give me later, in the future? Now, for example, there is a video of mine on the internet where I talk about buying earrings for my wife. I once bought for $1 million. So from the perspective of buying jewelry, it's a foolish purchase. It seems, how can you buy earrings for $1 million? But from an investment perspective, I bought investment grade diamonds. They are numbered investment grade, so their price only increases. As a result, it's like I bought earrings, jewelry, but in reality, it's an investment. A poor person might think, oh, he bought expensive earrings, I'll buy them too. He might buy jewelry that is not of investment grade, and as a result, he will just buy very expensive glass trinkets. If a diamond is not of investment grade, then it is essentially glass trinkets or clear stones, which are harder to resell, and moreover, their price does not increase. Is growing, and this applies to everything. Even when I bought a car for myself to drive in the city, I thought I needed a car all weather so I could drive, if necessary, go up into the mountains and so on. And if anything, after it becomes old, I can use it for hunting. As a result, I bought a Land Cruiser 300 sports version. This allows me to drive it comfortably in any weather in the city. It sells easily on the secondary market. Land Cruiser is a very popular model. And most importantly, when this car gets old, I can use it for hunting. This is how you should approach all your purchases. Unfortunately, poor people, when they buy something, they buy it to satisfy some of their needs. And wealthy people buy things as a step towards achieving their goals. They buy, as I said, they buy a function, the function that this thing performs. And the more functions a thing performs, the cheaper it essentially is for them. For example, when I bought a car like a Land Cruiser, my function was to get from point A to point B to leave home for meetings and drive around. I looked at the price, the ratio, price, quality, and plus these 5 questions that I mentioned before. But thanks to the fact that I know I can get more out of the same car, I can go to the mountains, I can go hunting, and in the future I can keep it as a hunting jeep. I see that for the same price, I have a greater number of functions that this car can perform for me.
All aspiring entrepreneurs ask themselves this important question when they attend business trainings, when they follow popular bloggers. Everyone unanimously says rent an apartment you can't afford, buy expensive cars, definitely go on a luxurious vacation. This will energize you, give you expansion, like boundaries, level of norm, all this is what they call it. And then all this will sharply elevate you on your path as an entrepreneur. And this completely contradicts what you are currently saying. So how should one properly relate to this?
Well, first of all, it's important to clearly understand that when many bloggers or businessmen, especially in the info business, buy expensive cars, Rolls-Royce and so on, they show yachts. Well, they don't show yachts, but they show luxurious houses, apartments and so on. First of all, it should be understood that this is a marketing tool because expensive cars, Rolls-Royce, apartments, yachts, helicopters immediately attract attention. And the goal of these people is to attract your attention. This is the first thing to understand, because often these cars are not their cars. They rent them. That's the first point. The second point, yes, this tool works, but you need to understand when it works. In our brain, there are 2 systems. The first system is our brain, the second system is our subconscious, and they work differently. As a rule, our brain sets goals. We say, well, we want to earn money, we want to achieve something, and so on. And the problem is that we set certain goals for ourselves, but in reality, we are constantly overcome by procrastination, laziness, excuses, and so on. Why does this happen? This happens because there is no agreement between our conscious self and the subconscious. Imagine in your head like your head is an office, and in this head there is a CEO, your brain, and a CFO, your subconscious. So the CEO comes and says, all right, let's make big money, go ahead. Big money is new opportunities. Big money is freedom. Freedom is new opportunities. And leaves. All the employees run to the subconscious, the financial director, and say, oh, the boss said, that's it, we're making big money, let's go, and so on. And the subconscious says, and what did the boss say? They say, well, the boss said, by big money is freedom, and freedom is new opportunities.
And he says,
and new opportunities are new risks, and risks are problems, and problems are responsibility. Though we need responsibility. We lived pretty well, seemed to live normally. Why do we need new responsibility? Why do we need new problems? And yet the employees say, well, yes. So what does the boss say? Let's pretend to the boss that we're sick. Let's start getting distracted to divert his attention. Let's start getting distracted by everything. Let's say start being lazy. And in this way, these mechanisms are activated so that the person does not achieve their goal. And why does this happen? The root lies in the lack of agreement between the conscious and the subconscious. The thing is, our subconscious, it's the reptilian brain and the amygdala, I believe it's called, which is responsible for our survival. And our egoism lives right there. It always operates on this principle. I'll give you energy, but what's in it for me? The fact is, the subconscious is responsible for whether we will have the energy and motivation to achieve something. But you always ask the question, what's in it for me? And if the subconscious doesn't see some benefit, pleasure, or advantage for itself, it won't give energy to our brain. Therefore, when you set a goal, you need to clearly understand this. Set a goal, take action, achieve the result. You must reward your subconscious. I also often say that successful people are those who have turned achieving goals into a habit. And for a habit to form, there is such a loop. Creating a habit, set a goal, take actions, achieve results, reward yourself, and then your self-esteem grows. Your subconscious says, oh, great. Our brain has learned to set the right goals. I will give him energy for this. Adieu. And the subconscious sees that he gets pleasure, some enjoyment, or some personal benefits from each goal. Can you buy an expensive item to gain motivation? Yes, you can, but on the condition that you have already achieved several goals before that. This can be done, as I said, as an intermediate reward for yourself for achieving goals. The principle is to first set a goal, take action, then reward yourself. Why do you reward yourself? To set an even bigger goal. And in this way, by learning to fuel your subconscious, you activate the mechanism and your habit of achieving goals. In this case, it works. But if you buy an expensive item that you cannot afford, it will demoralize you and drive you into depression because it will increase the level of stress you already have. You can't just increase stress without reinforcing it with dopamine. Dopamine is the hormone that stimulates us to achieve goals and provides pleasure from achieving them. Cortisol is the stress hormone. Thus, key when you buy something without having a big goal, you simply increase your cortisol level and drive yourself into depression. And when you have a huge release of dopamine, you see the goal, then the purchase does not cause you stress. It gives you anticipation of an even greater goal and even greater reward. In general, the topic of goal setting, rewards, and purchases are big topics that are also related to psychology. And most importantly, it is necessary and important to understand all the mechanisms behind this. Hey, I